So I'm recording this video shortly after Immortals have just won DreamHack Summer, and I've entitled it Immortals Recovery because obviously leading into DreamHack Summer, the Immortals had a little bit of trouble, especially when it came to the event over at Katowice, where they were actually unable to qualify for the next major in Cologne, which is basically a repeat of what happened for them where they were unable to qualify for MLG Columbus. And so I just kind of wanted to use this video to take a brief look at the history of the team leading up to now, talk a little bit about how they fell off a bit, and now talking about how they were actually able to secure their second title with this starting 5 lineup, as of course they had won their first title back at the CEVO Gfinity Season 9 finals just a couple of months ago, but that's when they still had Peacemaker as a coach, who has now left, and of course is coaching Team Liquid, and now they have a man by the name of Zach as their coach, and of course Baltz is now firmly the in-game leader. So there's definitely been some changes between the two titles, but I definitely just wanted to kind of maybe talk a little bit about everything going on with this team in recent times. But before I do that, I'm going to rewind a little bit here and just kind of briefly go over the history of the team. So I'm not going to go all the way back, but what I do want to start with is how this team really started gaining some notoriety. This is, of course, after they had already made the roster changes, where, of course, they had lost FNX and Taco, who went to Luminosity Gaming, and they brought Baltz over, who had formerly played for LG, and then they picked up a man by the name of Phelps, who people have been hyping up in the Brazilian community for quite some time as being this new rising talent that maybe had some ego or attitude problems, but he was still going to be given a chance on this team, which at the time was Games Academy still, but would be picked up by Tempo Storm and fly that banner for quite some time until just recently being acquired by Immortals. And when they finally got that roster solidified, they brought Peacemaker over as a coach during this same time they brought Phelps in as a player and Baltz in. They were able to start dominating the North American scene, at least in online play. And this really came from watching them being able to just kind of tear their way through the North American competition when it came to qualifying for events such as DreamHack Malmö, where they were able to beat teams like Echo Fox, Optic, and Cloud9 pretty convincingly to get a slot there. And they were, one of the only teams from the Americas region to get a slot for that tournament. And then we saw them actually beating Liquid, CLG, and Cloud9 to get a spot for IEM Katowice. They were also doing pretty good when it came to some of the North American leagues. You know, they were playing in some of the CEVO stuff, and they were doing quite good there. They did finally lose to CLG. I think they also lost to CLG in the iBuyPower Cup, so maybe towards the very end of 2015 going into 2016, finally some of the North American teams started catching up with them. But there was a period for at least a couple of months, if not longer than that, where they really seemed to be kind of establishing themselves as, you know, maybe just below Luminosity on the totem pole of teams that were competing in the Americas region. And it was really great to see. I mean, you could definitely tell they had some talent on the team. A guy like Phelps, and it was a really flashy, aggressive rifler. You had Henny, a very flashy opper, had all these crazy highlight reel moments where he's hitting all these nut shots. He missed some easier ones, of course, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but he still would just show that he could be quite explosive, like a Brazilian JW, a wild card that would be able to make plays for you when the team was fading, or when times were getting tough and you were looking for an opening. He could create some space, or maybe he could, you know, open something up on a retake by hitting a couple of crazy shots or holding a sight down. Definitely a very flashy player. Baltz was really established himself as this stable, consistent, passive rifler, the rock that you could rely on, who would always be able to output a good amount of numbers, even if maybe some of the other guys were fluctuating. And you had Lucas, who was kind of another aggressive rifler next to Phelps, who didn't necessarily output the same types of numbers that Phelps had, and maybe he didn't look as talented as Phelps when it came to actual skill level in play, but even he was contributing pretty well. And then Showtime was kind of the other passive rifler, also a secondary opper, particularly on CT sides. I think the maps I know most for it would be, you know, maybe maps like Cobblestone, or particularly Mirage on Upper B. You know, he would fulfill that role. And he was kind of maybe one of the more quiet players on the team, especially when it came to some of their lands, but in online play he looked quite good, and they had a lot going for them, and they were backed up by this great strategical foundation that they built mostly through, in the beginning stages, Peacemaker, who was their coach, who was their primary shot caller. And the style that this team really showed off was that slower, more methodical style, that default-based play at the foundation, and then you would look for openings or try to find a hole in the defense to line up some type of attack, usually trying to grab some type of map control in the process, like mid-cache or mid-mirage or something like that, and then kind of working from that. Making these kind of mid-round adjustments, these reads, like very Navi-esque or Luminosity-esque in the way that they approach the game. And they had the right players in all the right roles, and they seem to have great teamwork, great chemistry. They seem to communicate well. They seem to always be on the same page whenever they did go for an execute, whether they were deciding to change things up and go something earlier in the round rather than going default every single time, or when they're in the default and they finally decide what they want to do, they always seem to be, like I said, on the same page, very crisp in their attacks, very coordinated. Everything just looked so well done, so well ran. And you could also tell there were these elements of anti-stratting and scouting that was likely coming from Peacemaker as well. And so this team really did have all the building blocks to be the type of team that you could expect to do good things. And we already talked about how they were dominating in the North American scene. And then when it came to LAN, they went to IEM Katowice, where they were actually able to get 5th, 6th place at that event, and this included being able to take maps off of teams like eFrag and Virtus Pro and Envy, and then they actually took a map off of Navi as well in the playoffs. They beat them on Cobblestone in an overtime game, which of course Navi, a great Cobblestone team, and Immortals, then Tempo Storm would eventually prove themselves to also be quite a good Cobblestone team, and they had a close loss on Mirage there. They looked really good, but there was this big problem, which was a month before that IEM Katowice, where they did kind of start taking these maps off elite teams and start establishing themselves as possibly a top team in the world. They failed to qualify for MLG Columbus, and this was because they lost a really close game to G2 on Dust 2, 13-16, and then they just got absolutely stone cold destroyed by Flipside Tactics. 2 16-5 losses on Cash and Train. It was disgusting to watch this happen, especially when you look at before MLG Columbus, when they were doing quite good in the NA scene and online play and looking very strong. Then they have one of their first big LAN tests, and they're unable to really come up with much. But then just a month later, they had this pretty good showing at IEM Katowice. But then you go to DreamHack Malmö, they actually fall out in groups because they lose to Envy. So Envy kind of gets their revenge on them from IEM Katowice, I guess you could say. Though they did actually beat Envy in the group stages in the best of 1. But when it came to the best of 3 decider, they actually got 2-0'd by Envy. And so maybe they were kind of taking a step back down again. But then we saw them go to the CEVO Gfinity Season 9 finals. And here, this was at the very end of April, beginning of May of this year, they were able to take the title. They beat SK 2-0, they beat Dignitas 2-1. They had a pretty grueling best of 5 series against Virtus Pro, where they were able to 3-2 their way out of that in the semifinals. And then against SK in the grand final, they were able to win the series, I believe, 3-1. They won the first 2 maps. I think they lost the third, and they came back and won the 4th. And so a pretty convincing win against SK to get the 3-1 and get their first title. Finally, they were giving themselves a victory. They had been showing promise, but now they finally had one under their belt, a trophy to take back home. And then shortly after this event is where you kind of saw this change start taking place, where Boltz is becoming the in-game leader. And he was, in fact, the full-time in-game leader, apparently, at the CEVO Season 9 finals. But, of course, Peacemaker was still the coach, giving lots of input from what I understand and from what I witnessed myself. It seemed like maybe Boltz would have some initial calls at the beginning of rounds, but maybe once the pressure got to him, or he ran out of ideas, or whenever he was focusing on things mid-round, that's where you could really see Peacemaker begin to chime in, direct traffic, make sure everyone was, staying composed and staying disciplined, and making sure that the game plan was still being followed. So he was still a very big part of this team's leadership. And then going into DreamHack Austin, we're able to see Immortals, or then Tempo Storm, able to continue to establish themselves as a top team in the North American region, within the best teams in the region. They're beating teams like Energy, Liquid, and Cloud9 to make it to the finals, where they actually lost to Luminosity. So they take a second place finish here. So things are looking great. But then we see the big change, which is where they lost Peacemaker, their coach, and Boltz became the full in-game leader with actually no real coach behind him. I think Dead from Luminosity, who's a manager over there, helped them out a little bit. And then, of course, they recently hired Zach when they were getting picked up by Immortals, who has been with them at this DreamHack Summer event. I think he was also with them at the minor and at the IEM Katowice, which is Cologne qualifiers for this next upcoming major as well. But we were beginning to see Immortals have some problems at these events, and we'll particularly focus in on the ESL 1 Cologne qualifier that took place at Katowice, where we did see them really struggle. They got absolutely destroyed by Envious on Dust 2 to open up the event. Then they went on to lose to Tyloo on Cash. And then they finally got themselves a map victory against Empire, kind of a smaller team, I guess, that most people don't really think of as being amongst the top ranks in the world. And then they got eliminated by Flipside Tactics. So they went 1-3 at this Swiss system that was in place over at IEM Katowice, and so they miss out on the major once more. And what was really devastating about this is when you watch them play, it appeared as though they had completely changed things up. So now they were taking a more aggressive style of play, it seemed. They were kind of moving away from the slower, more methodical, steady play that they were so accustomed to in the past that had shown them a lot of success. And I do want to point out that there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with shifting into more of an aggressive direction. It just means that your play is going to be more dynamic. It means that you're going to be able to change the tempo at different points in the game and make it harder for your opponent to read you, because you'll be able to have this slower default style that's still at your roots, what you've been known for, what you've been prided on for so long. But now you're adding a new element to your game. Now you can do these aggressive plays that catch people off guard. Luminosity and Navi, the teams that were famous for the slow style, kind of like what this Tempo Storm team coming to Immortals did, also have made that shift. You have seen Luminosity add a lot of speed to their games. Now, you do see Fallen giving the team more freedom, allowing people to be a little bit more loose in how they play, spread them out, give them opportunities to take duels. Then, at the end, though, Fallen still has the final say to kind of get everyone back together and actually run the tactic that he so chooses. And he can still fall back on that slower, more methodical style if things aren't working out. But particularly on maps like Mirage, where you see Luminosity have these quicker splits on the B bomb side up cat in the B apartments, or the faster mid A splits. I'm just using Mirage as an example. Navi can do the exact same thing now. So again, there's nothing wrong with having the more aggressive play to make you more diverse, as long as you still have that foundation in your back pocket of being able to go to that default style, the tried and true bread and butter, whatever you want to call it, approach to the game that you've built your success on. But it was almost as if this Immortals team had lost that. They didn't have that in their back pocket anymore. It seemed as though when I was watching them play, they just didn't look nearly as crisp. They were trying to be a bit more individual in their play. They relied a little bit more on the firepower that they have rather than the teamwork that they were so famous for. And you could really see them struggling. I particularly noticed this watching some of the earlier games at the Cologne qualifiers, and they were playing against Envy on Dust 2, or they were playing against Tyloo on Cash. They just didn't look nearly as crisp, and I wondered a lot if it was because of the loss of Peacemaker, who, yes, Bolts had been in-game leading for the team, even dating all the way back to when they won their first title at CEVO, but Peacemaker was still there to help, to assist, to fill in the holes. If Bolts was out of ideas, or if Bolts was going quiet, or if there was some communications not being delivered by players because they're focused on fragging, he could fill in those gaps and really help them out. And it seemed as though with Peacemaker gone, they didn't have that anymore. So even if Bolts was a capable in-game leader, the moment he met adversity and he was struggling to come up with the proper adjustments or changes to the game plan that would finally allow his team to recover and get back in the games, or have a chance to go out and win one, he didn't have anything to fall back on. There was no safety net. There was no support system behind him to ensure that the team could still run properly, even if he was running out of ideas. And so that really seemed to be kind of a key cause to me. It's also true that since Bolts took over the in-game leadership of the team, his production went down a little bit as a player. He wasn't as much of the rock player that you expected. At DreamHack Austin, he had a pretty rough event. I think he went negative overall whenever you look at that event. It's not as if he took a heavy hit. I think most of the reason why he went negative was probably because of the Luminosity game in the finals, but even against like Cloud9 and Liquid, he was looking a little bit weaker at that DreamHack Austin event when he was really taking over the core leadership of the team. And then obviously at the qualifiers for Cologne, Bolts really struggled against Flipside in that loss, really struggled against Tyloo in the loss on Cash, which is going horribly negative. This looked very uncharacteristic for Bolts, and I still wonder, even after winning DreamHack Summer going forward, if this is something we still need to keep an eye on, is the fact that Bolts' production has gone down a little bit. I mean, granted, when they just won DreamHack Summer, he still went plus 14 for the event, so it's not as if, you know, he was crippled by leading, but it still doesn't seem like he's quite the same player with his fragging ability as he was when he wasn't leading, which is understandable. Obviously, taking on a new role, a new responsibility is going to limit you somewhat, but you can't let it cripple you, I think, is the big difference that you have to kind of keep an eye on when you're looking at that. So again, just looking at the ESO1 Cologne qualifiers in Katowice, they just didn't seem like they were on the same page as much. They didn't seem as disciplined or as fine-tuned of a machine as the team of the past, and so I did kind of wonder if that was an impact of Peacemaker leaving the team. And it was also in the back of your head, you also have to wonder, is it just the pressure of qualifying for a major gets to them? Because remember, surrounding the MLG Columbus qualification process, they were doing quite well in regional play. Just a month after Columbus, they were able to go on and get some nice maps over at IEM Katowice of last year in 2015, and they were able to win a title at SIVO after that, you know, a few months later. So is it just the pressure of qualifying for a major that gets to them? Because this happens to them again where, you know, yes, leading up to the Cologne qualifiers, they were struggling a little bit. You know, they lost to Optic at the minor, for example, in the finals, which is maybe you thought that they were the favorites to win that whole event. Then they weren't really tested at the ESA Premier Land, so I don't think you can really draw too much from that one. So yeah, you were a little bit worried going into the Cologne qualifiers, and then sure enough, in the Cologne qualifiers, they did struggle. But now, right afterwards, just a few weeks afterwards, they're sitting here at DreamHack Summer winning the whole event, beating teams like Nip and Godsent to do it. So it's just like, is it just this mental block of qualifying for a major they take into account? I'm not really sure at this point, but let's get into DreamHack Summer now, because they've just won the title here, and even in this event, it didn't start out so well, right? So they played against SK, who are without Pimp, who has joined Liquid. They're also without Magic's Boy, who I'm not sure if he had, I think it was something to do with school or something like that, where he couldn't attend this event, so they have Glaive standing in, who's also supposed to stand in for Astralis at the major, so he's all over the place. And then there's this other guy named Valdi. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but he's not even a player that I am very much familiar with. You know, if I'm being quite honest with you, I didn't really know much about this player at all. I know he played a little bit for, I guess, Copenhagen Wolves before he's stepping in for this, and he looked pretty good, I mean, throughout this event for SK, so I'm not going to take anything away from that guy, but you would still think SK with two stand-ins, and also a team that in the past, this 5 of Immortals have beaten twice, in fact, at the SIVO LAN in group play and in the grand finals, that they should be able to handle this, but they lose it 13-16 to open up the event, and now you're wondering, oh no, has this carried over from the major qualifiers? They're still struggling. You know, they didn't really look so hot in that game. When you look at it, I mean, they were able to get 9 rounds on the Terra side, so that was pretty good, but then just couldn't get anything going on their CT side. Bolts, again, you know, he had a couple of these games at the Cologne qualifiers where he was looking horribly negative. Here's another game, he's 14-23. You're wondering what's going on here. You know, Phelps had a pretty good game with 29 kills. Lucas was looking pretty good, but Hen 1 seemed quiet. Bolts is not your old reliable anymore, so it wasn't a good opening to DreamHack Summer. Definitely a concerning opener, but then directly following this disappointing loss to SK, they went to play up against INTS, of course, the Finnish team, who recently made some changes. They brought in Nasu as the in-game leader in place of Standa. Now Alu is full-time opping, and so they're making these changes, but INTS has still not really established themselves as being a top international team. So this seems to be an opportunity here for Immortals to get back into the swing of things, and they do. They do have a pretty close win against INTS that was a little bit scary throughout that game. But they always seem to be in pretty decent control of it, and they're able to win out that series 2-0. They had a very convincing one on Cobblestone directly afterwards, which has always been a pretty good map for the team. And then they go up against SK. They get their revenge after losing the first map in the series, 16-6 on Cobblestone, which again looks really scary now when you're looking back to the beginning of the tournament. They're able to take that one in stride and then come out and win Overpass and Train in one-sided victories. So well done to them. So then they go on to play against Godsent here in the semifinals, a team that's been looking pretty hot lately, and they open up with the win, but then they proceed to lose on Mirage. Again, a strong map for Immortals, but Godson able to take it away from them, and then they come back though and they win on train, so they get themselves into the grand finals. And here's where they're going to face Nip, and they're actually able to beat Nip on Cash in the first map of the series. And remember, Cash has historically not been a great map for the Brazilian teams, but particularly a team like Immortals. I mean, Luminosity has begun to work Cash into I guess Dust 2 into their map pool, and Cash has become their auto ban, for example, right? And Immortals was a team that really wasn't so fixated on Cash either. And you're going up against a team that was probably the best Cash team in the world. They had won their last 9 matches on land on Cash. They were undefeated on the map, and here it is. Immortals able to take it away from them. And then up against Nip on Mirage, again, Immortals were able to take the win. This time it wasn't as convincing. They had a huge first half that was quite convincing, 12-3 from their T side, but on their CT side, they were really struggling to close out the game, but they finally got it done. Right as Nip was getting to 13 rounds, it was in fact Immortals able to win the next 2 to close out the game 16-13, so a round earlier than going the full distance. And what I noticed throughout this grand finals and through some of the other games is that Immortals were still playing more aggressively. They weren't going back to their roots as much. They were still quite brute forcing the team that they were playing against. That was still really their focus, and they were hitting a lot of shots. I mean, so their players were on fire. Particularly Phelps had a really great series. I mean, on Cash, this guy dropped 30 kills on that particular map, and then even over on Mirage, the second map that they won, he had a great game with 25 kills there. So I mean, that's just Phelps going completely ludicrous in this game. You also have to say that Hen 1 had a pretty good tournament overall, so that's another, like I said, the wild card player, the Brazilian JW. He had a great event overall, and in the event plus 36 in fact, so he really did a good job. And I think Lucas was the other really big standout here. That was really big because Lucas had actually went -14 at the Cologne qualifiers, but he had looked really good for them at SEVO whenever they won that title. It looked pretty good for them at DreamHack Austin, looking pretty good for them at the minor, but he really stepped up his game at this DreamHack Summer event, which was particularly good because when someone like Baltz's production is going down a little bit, for someone like Lucas to rise up and kind of take that place while Phelps and Henny are still playing quite well, that's big news for this team. I think Lucas has been kind of a key factor in some of the recent success of this team, is the fact that his performance has really gone up because he's kind of the other aggro guy besides Phelps. And I saw him opening up many rounds. There's one particular round I remember against Nip on Mirage where he just ran through upper B and got 2 picks onto the B bomb side, just opened it up wide open for his team, so he could make plays like that, things he wasn't really known for in the past. And so that's definitely great news for him. Even Showtime, who had a really terrible time at the SEVO finals where they even won the title, he went like -43 there. He started to pick up the pace a little bit. He only went -2 here at DreamHack Summer, which maybe you don't think is so good, but when you consider the fact that in the playoffs, when it mattered the most against Godsent and against NIP, he was actually positive throughout all those games. If I do some quick math here, I think he was, looking here, let's see, I think he was +24 in playoffs. So most of his negatives came in the group play. So he really stepped up his game as well. So again, if you're having Showtime and Lucas firing off, even if Baltz's production goes down, they totally make up for it, especially when you still have Phelps, who's been playing super consistent lately. I mean, when you look at this guy, Phelps, he's just been wonderful for this team. I mean, he didn't do so well at the minor. That was definitely an off event for him. But when you look at the title at SEVO, when you look at, he was actually one of the guys who still did okay individually at the Cologne qualifiers, and in this event he almost went +30. And when you're getting a lot of consistency out of Phelps, and that's been one of the big pieces of this team that's helped them succeed as well, is the strategy they had from before, the fact that Lucas is picking up his game, the fact that Phelps has become more consistent, and then Baltz was already a rock, and now that Baltz maybe isn't as consistent, you have Showtime and Lucas at least stepping up for this one event in a big way. And Lucas has been doing it for a while now. So these are all things that are really helping the team out. And so the point is that they made the aggressive style work at this particular event. They were able to brute force through Nip. When they met some resistance, they were able to keep their composure and still close out the game in the end. Now, there are still some question marks for me for this team, and that is Baltz. I just don't want to see him crippled. If he's going to keep the in-game leadership, if his production goes down a little bit, as long as he can stay positive, that's fine, but he does need to be able to rise up if in fact other players are struggling. So that's yet to be seen. Also, they never really got shut down by Nip on their terrorist side, for example, on Mirage on the T side. And so they were able to just to keep up this aggression, keep up these faster plays, these crazy connector ramp splits on the A-bomb, these crazy pushes in the B apartments. But I do wonder, will they be able to fall back on their roots if in fact they meet resistance in the future? I'm still not 100% sold on the fact that the leadership of this team is in a better place than it was before when they had Peacemaker. Yes, they're still functioning. Yes, they still just won a title. But I feel like their title, especially against NiP in the finals, is really predicated on the fact that they were able to, dictate the pace of the game. They were able to stay aggressive. They were able to be in their opponents' faces. And they had really good performances individually out of all of their players pretty much in the grand finals. And even in the playoffs, people who were quieter in the group stage really came alive when it mattered most, particularly guys like Phelps and Showtime, in fact. So, it's like they really, they met resistance, but it was on their CT sides, and they're just trying to close the game. They didn't meet so much resistance on their terrorist sides. And so, you could just say their terrorist sides are really good, but you could also just say their form was so good that they made the aggressiveness work. And so I do wonder if they're still going to be able to fall back on some deeper tactics if, in fact, in the future, the aggression does not pan out the same way it happened here. So that's the question mark. Already mentioned the Bolts thing. Also need to know if Lucas and Showtime are going to be able to keep up the type of form we saw for them in the playoffs at DreamHack Summer. Like I said, it seems like Lucas has been doing it for quite some time, but Showtime's really been hit or miss. So that's another big question mark for me. And so, yeah, I'm still wondering about the leadership a bit. Still worried about some of the form of their players. But then again, Phelps and Henny have been quite good for this team lately. Lucas on the rise, so they do have some good form coming out of a lot of their players as well. So that one, you could go either way, I think. But at the end of the day, we have to congratulate Immortals on their victory. It is a great recovery, especially missing out on the next major. That certainly has to hurt, but at least they've been able to acquire another title to add next to their CEVO trophy. So that's now 2 titles for this starting 5 within just the last few months. So they're still definitely a top 10 team in the world. They could still be knocking on the door of the top 5 in the future if they can keep it up. And so there's a lot of positive things going on for this team, but there are a couple of concerns that I highlighted that we do need to keep an eye on. So I'll just leave it at that. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please follow and subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.